The great station floated in the darkness between stars. It was called Eternity's Throne, and it was the most important place in the galaxy. Here, the 12 most powerful species met to decide the fate of worlds. They called themselves the Conclave of 12, and they had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Today, they were meeting to discuss a new species. A young species? A species that had just discovered how to travel between stars. They were called humans. Ambassador. Velkarn sat in his floating chair and looked at the information on his screen. He was a Silthari, a being made of silver light that shifted and flowed like water. His species had mastered the secrets of energy itself. They could live for 5,000 years. They could speak directly into the minds of others. They were considered one of the wisest species in the galaxy. Velkarn was not impressed by what he saw. The humans came from a small planet called Earth. It was a strange world with water covering most of its surface. The planet had hot places and cold places, wet places and dry places. It seemed chaotic and messy to Velkarn. How could any advanced species come from such a disordered world? He read further. Humans lived for less than 100 years. They could not regenerate lost limbs. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. They could not survive in the vacuum of space. They could not see in the dark. They needed to eat multiple times every day and sleep for 8 hours every night. Velkarn made a sound of disappointment. These creatures were so limited, so fragile, so ordinary. The other ambassadors were reading the same information. Kethern, of the Kethari, clicked his mandibles together. His species were giant insects with armor harder than steel. They could survive in the cold vacuum of space for hours. They had fought wars across 100 worlds. And these humans have soft skin, Kethern said. They would not survive 1 minute in true combat. They are prey animals. Next to him, the Morvethi ambassador hissed in agreement. The Morvathi were hunters who fed on fear. They were tall and thin, with skin like shadow and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. They could sense the emotions of other beings and use those emotions against them. I have tasted the minds of humans, the Morvathi said. They are filled with emotion. Fear, love, anger, hope. They feel everything so strongly. It makes them unstable, unpredictable, weak. The ancient Dralith ambassador said nothing at first. The Dralith were giants made of living stone. They were the oldest species in the conclave, and they measured time in millions of years. Finally, the Dralith spoke, its voice like rocks grinding together. Their biology is unremarkable. They have no special features. They are average in every way, Velkarn nodded. This was the conclusion he had reached as well. Humans were ordinary. They were nothing special. They would be useful for simple work, perhaps. They could dig in mines or build simple structures, but they would never be important. They would never matter. I propose we classify humanity as Tier 7, Velkarn announced. A labor species. They may join the conclave as workers and servants. They pose no threat and offer no significant value. The other ambassadors began to signal their agreement. It seemed the decision was made, but one ambassador remained silent. Zereth, of the Navigators, sat in the corner of the great chamber. His species were travelers. They had mapped the galaxy over millions of years, visiting every world, meeting every species. They were not warriors or rulers. They were observers. They watched and remembered Zivareth had visited Earth. He remembered landing on that chaotic planet with its blue skies and green forests. He remembered walking among the humans, studying them, learning their ways. He had expected to find simple creatures living simple lives. Instead, he had found something that troubled him. He had watched humans build cities that touched the clouds. He had seen them cross oceans in ships made of metal. He had observed them fly through the air in machines they had invented themselves. They had done all of this in just a few thousand years. Most species took millions of years to achieve such things. But that was not what troubled Zerathi. What troubled him was what he saw in their eyes. He had looked into the eyes of human soldiers and seen something strange. He had seen fear, yes. Humans felt fear like any other creature. But behind the fear, there was something else. Something hard. Something that refused to break. He had watched recordings of human history. He had seen them fight wars against each other, terrible wars that killed millions. And yet after every war, they rebuilt. They recovered. They continued. He had seen them face disasters that should have destroyed them, plagues that killed half their population, ice ages that covered their world in frost. And every time, they survived. They adapted. They grew stronger. Xyrath had learned a human word during his visit. The word was stubborn. It meant refusing to give up, even when giving up was the logical choice. Even when continuing was foolish and painful and hopeless, humans were stubborn. Xyrath wanted to speak. He wanted to warn the Conclave that they were making a mistake. These creatures were not ordinary. They were something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. But when he looked around the chamber, he saw the other ambassadors laughing. They were joking about the soft skin of humans. They were mocking their short lives and their emotional minds. They thought they knew everything about every species in the galaxy. Xyrath had been a navigator for 3,000 years. He had learned that the wisest choice was often to remain silent, and so he said nothing. He let the vote proceed. The decision was unanimous. Humanity was classified as Tier 7, non-threatening, combat capability, negligible. The record was filed. The meeting ended. The ambassadors returned to their worlds, already forgetting about the insignificant species called humans. Xyrath remained behind, floating alone in the empty chamber. He looked at the stars through the great windows of Eternity's throne. Somewhere out there, on a small blue planet, the humans were building their first starships. They were reaching toward the galaxy with hands that had no claws and hearts that did not know how to quit. Xyrath felt something he had not felt in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion. It was unease. The Conclave had made their assessment. They believed they understood humanity. They believed these ordinary creatures posed no threat, held no importance. Xyrath hoped they were right, but deep in his ancient heart, he knew they were wrong. 6 months passed after the Conclave made their decision about humanity. Life continued across the galaxy. Species traded and traveled and lived their lives. The great civilizations believed they were safe. They believed their power would last forever. They were wrong. The warning came from the edge of known space. A small outpost detected something moving through the darkness. At first, the sensors showed 1 ship, then 10, then 100. Then the sensors stopped counting because there were too many to count. The devouring swarm had returned. No one knew where the swarm came from. Some believed they were born in the spaces between galaxies. Others thought they were a weapon created by some ancient civilization, now long dead. All anyone knew for certain was that the swarm was hungry. They consumed everything: planets, moons, stars, life. They had destroyed 17 civilizations before disappearing into the void 1,000,000 years ago. The galaxy had forgotten them. They had become stories to frighten children. Legends, myths. Now, myths were real again. The swarm's ships were not made of metal or crystal. They were alive. They were grown from flesh and bone and dark matter. Each ship was a creature, and all the creatures were connected. They shared one mind, one hunger, one purpose: to feed. The Conclave responded quickly. They gathered their greatest fleets at a place called the Velar Nebula. The Silthari sent their ships of pure light. The Cathari sent their armored destroyers. The Morvathi sent their shadow vessels. Together, they formed the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever assembled. The battle lasted 3 hours. The swarm did not fight like normal enemies. They did not care about strategy or honor or survival. They simply attacked. They threw themselves at the Conclave fleet in endless waves. When 1 ship died, 2 more took its place. When the defenders destroyed 1,000, 10,000 more emerged from the darkness. The Silthari, tried to communicate with the swarm. They sent messages of peace and understanding. The swarm did not respond. It did not understand peace. It only understood hunger. The Cathari fought with all their strength. Their armored ships crashed into the bioships, trying to break them apart. But the swarm ships healed themselves. Wounds closed. Damage repaired. The Cathari watched in horror as enemies they had killed came back to life. The Morvathi tried to use their psychic powers. They reached into the mind of the swarm, hoping to find fear they could exploit. Instead, they found only emptiness, an endless void of hunger that stretched across millions of minds. Several Morvathi went insane from what they felt. By the third hour, the Conclave fleet was destroyed. Ships that had taken centuries to build burned in the nebula. Species that had ruled the stars for millennia died, screaming in the void. The survivors fled in all directions, carrying warnings to every corner of the galaxy. Run, hide, the swarm is coming. Nothing can stop them. Admiral Helena Cross received the warning aboard her ship, the UN's Defiance. She was a human woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had served in Earth's Space Navy for 30 years. She had fought pirates and rebels and criminals. She had never faced anything like this. She watched the footage from the Velar Nebula. She saw the beautiful ships of the Conclave shatter like glass. She saw the elegant formations break apart in chaos. She saw beings who had conquered stars die like insects beneath a boot. The message from the Conclave was clear. Humanity must evacuate. Humanity must run. Humanity was too weak to fight. The swarm would reach Earth's sector in 18 days. There was still time to escape. Helena Cross watched the footage again. She studied how the Conclave ships had fought. They had moved in perfect formations. They had followed precise tactics. They had fought with honor and discipline and grace, and they had lost. Helena leaned back in her chair and thought about human history. She thought about all the wars her species had fought. The brutal, ugly, terrible wars that had nearly destroyed them 100 times. She thought about how humans fought when their backs were against the wall. When there was nowhere to run, when death was certain. She remembered an old saying, humans don't fight fair. They fight to win. A smile crossed her face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just made a decision that would change everything. They fought like philosophers, she said quietly. Clean, organized, honorable. She turned to her officers, who were waiting for her orders. The Conclave lost because they tried to win beautifully. They forgot that war is not beautiful. War is ugly. War is chaos. War is survival. Her first officer looked nervous. Admiral, the Conclave had thousands of ships. We have less than 50. They had weapons beyond anything we possess. If they couldn't win because they fought the wrong way, Helena said. They tried to match the swarm's strength with their own strength. They tried to be bigger and more powerful than a force that is infinite. She stood up and looked at the stars through the bridge windows. We're not going to fight like them. We're going to fight like humans. What does that mean, Admiral? Helena Cross turned to face her crew. These were her people. They trusted her. They would follow her into the darkness if she asked them to. It means we're going to cheat, she said. We're going to lie. We're going to use every dirty trick our species has learned in 1,000,000 years of killing each other. We're going to fight like we have nothing to lose, because we don't. If we run, the swarm will eventually find us. If we hide, they will eventually hunt us down. Our only choice is to fight. She activated the communication system. Her voice reached every human ship in the fleet. It reached every human colony in the sector. It reached Earth itself, where billions of people waited in fear. This is Admiral Helena Cross, she said. The Conclave has told us to run. They say we're too weak to fight. They say we're ordinary. She paused, letting the words sink in. They're right. We are ordinary. We don't have natural armor. We don't have psychic powers. We don't live for thousands of years. We're just humans. She took a deep breath. But ordinary humans have done extraordinary things before. We've crossed oceans in wooden boats. We've climbed the highest mountains. We've walked on the moon. We did these things not because we were special, but because we refused to accept that they were impossible. Her voice grew harder. In 18 days, the swarm will arrive. They expect us to run. They expect us to be easy prey. They expect us to die quietly. A fire burned in her eyes. Let's show them what ordinary humans can do. We're not running. We're fighting. And we're going to make them regret ever coming to our corner of the galaxy. She ended the transmission. Across human space, people listened to her words. Some were afraid. Some thought she was insane. But others felt something stirring in their chests. Something old and powerful. Something that had carried their species through ice ages and plagues and wars. Hope mixed with defiance. The countdown began. 18 days until the swarm arrived. Humanity started preparing for war. The galaxy watched humanity prepare for war. Most species expected to see panic and chaos. They expected humans to build ships as fast as possible and throw them at the swarm in desperate hope. They expected failure. What they saw instead confused them. Human shipyards worked day and night. But they were not building beautiful vessels. They were building ugly things. Ships that looked like they had been assembled from spare parts and held together with hope. Every human ship had backup systems for its backup systems. They had extra engines, extra weapons, extra life support. Nothing was elegant. Everything was practical. Ambassador Zeroth watched from a human space station. He had fled his home world when the swarm destroyed it. Now he was a refugee, living among the species the Conclave had dismissed as ordinary. He spent his days observing their preparations, trying to understand what they were doing. A human engineer named Sarah Chen showed him around the station. She was a small woman with dark hair and grease stains on her hands. She smiled often, even though death was approaching. Your ships are not symmetrical, Zyrith observed. They have uneven weight distribution. This will affect their movement in combat. Sarah nodded. That's intentional. Predictable ships are easy to target. Our ships move strangely because they're built strangely. The swarm will have trouble tracking them. Zyrith considered this. It was clever in an odd way. But surely this makes them harder for your own pilots to control. Our pilots train for chaos, Sarah said. They practice flying broken ships. They practice fighting with half their systems offline. They practice making decisions when nothing works the way it should. She led him to a training simulator. Inside, a young pilot was flying a virtual ship that kept malfunctioning. Warning lights flashed constantly. Systems failed randomly. The pilot cursed and fought and somehow kept the ship moving. This seems cruel, Zyrith said. You are preparing them for failure. Sarah looked at him with something like pity. Ambassador, we are always preparing for failure. That is the human way. We assume everything will go wrong and we plan accordingly. Your conclave built perfect ships with perfect systems. When those systems failed, your people did not know what to do. Our people expect failure. They are ready for it. Over the following days, Zyrith saw more examples of this strange philosophy. He watched soldiers train in darkness. They practiced fighting with no light, no communication, no support. They fought alone and in groups. They learned to use anything as a weapon. Broken pipes. Pieces of metal. Their own bodies. He watched engineers deliberately break their own equipment, then race to repair it. They timed themselves. They competed to see who could fix the most damage in the shortest time. They laughed and joked even as they practiced for disaster. He watched commanders run battle simulations where everything went wrong. Ships exploded randomly. Communications failed. Officers died. The commanders were forced to adapt constantly, making decisions with incomplete information and no time to think. Why do you train for the worst outcome? Zyrith asked Admiral Cross one evening. They sat in her office, surrounded by maps and plans and reports. Helena poured him a cup of coffee. Zyrith had learned to tolerate the bitter drink, though he did not understand why humans loved it so much. Because the worst outcome is usually what happens, she said. Every battle plan fails the moment fighting begins. The enemy does something unexpected. Your ships malfunction. Your people panic. If you only train for perfect conditions, you will be helpless when conditions become imperfect. But the Conclave had the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Their ships were superior in every way. Their ships were superior when they worked, Helena agreed. But the swarm did not fight the way the Conclave expected. The swarm overwhelmed them with numbers and chaos. The Conclave could not adapt quickly enough. She set down her coffee cup. Humans have been fighting chaotic wars for our entire history. We have killed each other in every way imaginable. We have developed tactics that would horrify your civilized species. We fight dirty. We fight mean. We fight to survive. Zyra thought about this for a long time. He had studied human history during his visit to Earth. He had seen their wars. The trenches filled with poison gas. The cities burned with fire from the sky. The nuclear weapons that could destroy entire worlds. Humans were not just violent. They were creative in their violence. They constantly invented new ways to kill each other. And somehow, after every war, they survived. They recovered. They built again. Your species is not weaker than ours, Zereth said slowly. You are simply different. You evolved in a harsh world, surrounded by predators and competitors. You learned to fight not because you were stronger, but because you had to be cleverer. Lena smiled. Now you understand. The Silthari evolved in a peaceful environment. They became wise and powerful, but they never learned to struggle. The Cathari have natural armor, so they never learned to fight when wounded. The Morvathi rely on their psychic abilities, so they never learned to face an enemy they could not frighten. She leaned forward. Humans have no advantages, no natural weapons, no special powers. We are prey animals who learn to fight back. We are soft creatures who learn to build hard shells. We are short-lived beings who learn to pass our knowledge to the next generation. Her voice grew quiet but intense. We are ordinary. And ordinary beings who refuse to die are the most dangerous creatures in the universe. The final days passed quickly. Human ships gathered at the edge of their territory. 43 vessels against nearly 100 bioships. The numbers were impossible. Everyone knew it. But something strange happened across human space. Instead of despair, people felt determination. Instead of terror, they felt resolve. Parents told their children stories of human courage. Workers sang songs of defiance as they built weapons. Soldiers wrote letters to their loved ones, promising to make the swarm pay for every inch of human territory. Zereth had witnessed the fall of 17 civilizations to the swarm. In every case, the victims had surrendered to despair before the battle even began. They had accepted their death. They had given up hope. Humans had not given up. They had not surrendered. They were going to fight, knowing they would probably lose, because fighting was better than running. Fighting meant they controlled their own fate. Fighting meant they died on their terms, not the swarm's. On the 18th day, the sensors detected the swarm fleet emerging from deep space. 97 bioships, their flesh gleaming with hunger, their minds united in purpose. Admiral Helena Cross stood on the bridge of the Defiance. Her crew was ready. Her fleet was ready. Humanity was ready.
They think we are ordinary, she said to her bridge crew.
They think we will be easy. They think we will break. She looked at the approaching swarm on the tactical display. Each bioship was larger than any human vessel. Each one carried weapons that could crack planets. Together, they had consumed civilizations that made humanity look like children. Helena Crow smiled. Teach them what ordinary means. The first battle was about to begin. The swarm had consumed 17 civilizations. They had learned from each conquest. They knew how prey species behaved. They knew the patterns. First came the fear. Then came the desperate defense. Then came the collapse. Then came the feeding. They expected humans to follow the same pattern. The first sign that something was different came when the human fleet did not hold formation. Every species the swarm had faced tried to maintain defensive lines. They bunched together, seeking safety in numbers. This made them easy to surround, easy to isolate. Easy to consume, the humans scattered. 43 ships. Broke in 43 different directions the moment the swarm approached. They flew wild, chaotic patterns that made no tactical sense. They launched flares and decoys in clouds of metallic dust. They broadcast signals on every frequency, filling space with noise and confusion. The swarm's collective minds struggled to process what was happening. Their hunting instincts told them to chase the prey that ran. But the prey was running in every direction at once. The bioships began to separate, pursuing individual human vessels. That was their first mistake. The humans had prepared the battlefield. They had spent 18 days hiding surprises throughout the asteroid belt. Hollowed-out rocks contained hidden weapons. Dormant satellites waited in darkness. Mines floated in the void, invisible until they detected swarm flesh. The first bioship to die never saw its killer. A railgun battery hidden in an asteroid fired a slug of metal at a fraction of the speed of light. The slug punched through the bioship's flesh and exploded its core. The massive creature died before it understood what had happened. 7 more bioships died in the next minute. Mines detonated against their hulls. Hidden missiles emerged from darkness and struck their weak points. Satellites that had seemed dead suddenly came alive. Ramming into the swarm at incredible speeds, the hive mind reeled with shock and pain. This was not how prey behaved. Prey ran and hid. Prey did not set traps. Prey did not fight back with such vicious creativity, but the swarm was ancient and adaptive. They had survived for millions of years by learning from every encounter. They began to avoid the asteroids. They started scanning for hidden weapons. They adjusted their tactics to counter the human tricks. The humans changed. Tactics faster. Admiral Cross commanded the battle from the bridge of the Defiance. Her ship was already damaged. Fires burned in 3 sections. Half her weapons were offline. She did not care about any of this. They are adapting to our traps, her first officer reported. They are learning our patterns. Then we change the patterns, Helena said. Signal all ships. Execute Protocol Madness. Protocol Madness was not really a protocol. It was the absence of protocol. It meant every captain should do whatever they thought best, with no coordination, no communication, no plan. It meant chaos. Across the battlefield, human ships stopped trying to work together. Each captain became an independent actor, making decisions based on instinct and opportunity. Some charged directly at swarm ships, firing everything they had. Others retreated, drawing pursuers into trap zones. Some played dead, drifting with their systems offline. Waiting for swarm ships to come close before suddenly attacking. The swarm could not predict what would happen next. They could not anticipate human tactics, because humans had no tactics. They were improvising constantly, making up strategy on the fly, changing plans every minute. A human cruiser named the Jakarta rammed itself into a swarm bioship. The collision destroyed both vessels, but the Jakarta's crew had already evacuated 2 escape pods. The pods scattered in all directions, and the swarm had to decide whether to waste time hunting them or focus on the remaining human ships. The destroyer. Victory lost its main engines and started drifting toward a swarm formation. The swarm ignored the crippled ship, assuming it was dead. But the Victory's crew had routed all remaining power to the weapon systems. As the ship drifted through the swarm formation, it fired continuously in all directions, destroying 3 bioships before finally exploding. The frigate. Horizon ejected its reactor core directly into the path of a pursuing swarm vessel. The reactor exploded with the force of a small star, vaporizing the bioship and badly damaging to others nearby. The Horizon, now running on backup power, turned and fled deeper into the asteroid belt. Hour after hour, the battle raged. The swarm had never fought this long against a single enemy. Usually, their prey collapsed quickly, overwhelmed by the endless assault. But humans did not collapse. When their ships were damaged, they kept fighting. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were destroyed, they ejected and continued firing from emergency suits. They simply refused to die, Admiral. Cross watched the battle unfold through cameras on dozens of ships. She saw acts of incredible courage. She saw sacrifices that brought tears to her eyes. She saw her people doing the impossible because they had decided that impossible was just a word. The Defiance shook as another swarm attack struck home. More systems failed. More crew died. Helena gripped her command chair and refused to fall. "Status report," she demanded. "We have lost 22 ships," her first officer said. His voice was hoarse from hours of shouting orders. 21 remain combat effective. The swarm has lost 43 confirmed kills, with another 12 ships heavily damaged. Helena processed these numbers. They had destroyed nearly half the swarm fleet. This was more damage than the entire Conclave had inflicted at the VLR Nebula. But the cost had been terrible. "The swarm is regrouping," the sensor officer reported. "They are forming a new attack pattern. It looks like they are preparing for one massive assault." Helena understood. The swarm had decided to overwhelm the remaining human ships with pure numbers. They would accept losses, knowing they could still win through attrition. It was a smart strategy. It would probably work, unless she did something truly insane. "Signal all ships," Helena said. "Execute final protocol." Her first officer's face went pale. "Admiral, that protocol requires—" "I know what it requires." "Do it." Final protocol was simple. Every remaining human ship would charge directly at the swarm formation. No evasion. No tactics. No retreat. They would fly straight into the enemy and fight until they were destroyed, taking as many swarm ships with them as possible. It was a suicide attack. 21. Human ships turned toward the swarm. They accelerated to maximum speed, their damaged engines screaming with effort. They broadcast no signals. They made no threats. They simply charged. The swarm watched them come. The hive mind felt something it had never felt before, an emotion it had consumed from prey species, but never experienced itself. Uncertainty. These humans were not running. They were not defending. They were attacking, even though they were outnumbered, even though they were damaged, even though they faced certain death. They were attacking anyway. Why? The answer came to the hive mind in a flash of terrible understanding. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make the swarm pay such a terrible price that other species would see it was possible to resist. They were fighting so that their deaths would mean something. They were fighting because that was who they were, for the first time in millions of years. The devouring swarm hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, hidden weapons throughout the asteroid belt fired one last time. Missiles that had been held in reserve launched all at once. Railguns that had saved their ammunition for this moment opened fire. Everything humanity had left was thrown at the swarm in one devastating barrage. The swarm formation shattered. Bioships exploded by the dozen. The hive mind screamed with pain and confusion. And then the charging human fleet hit them. The battle became a slaughter. Human ships crashed into swarm vessels, firing until their weapons melted, ramming until their hulls crumbled. In the chaos, more hidden weapons found their targets. More traps were sprung. More humans died, taking swarm ships with them. 12 hours after the battle began, something impossible happened. The surviving swarm ships turned and fled. They had never retreated before. They had never run from prey. But they ran now, there. Hive minds screaming with something they had never felt from their own minds. Fear. When the battle ended, 41 human ships remained. Most were badly damaged. Many were barely functional. But they were alive. They had one. The swarm had lost 68 ships. 29 remained, fleeing into the darkness between stars. Admiral Helena Cross sat in her damaged command chair, surrounded by the ruins of her bridge. She was bleeding from a head wound. Half her crew was dead. Her ship was falling apart. But she was smiling. "Send a message to Earth," she said. "Tell them we are still here. Tell them we won." Across the battlefield, rescue ships began searching for survivors. Across the galaxy, other species watched recordings of the battle in stunned silence. Humanity had done the impossible. They had made the swarm afraid. The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Every species with a receiver heard the story. Every civilization with sensors watched the recordings. A species classified as Tier 7 had done what the mightiest fleets in the galaxy could not. Humanity had defeated the swarm. On Eternity's throne, the surviving members of the Conclave gathered in emergency session. The great chamber that had once held representatives of 12 powerful civilizations now contained only 7. The ambassador was gone, his species scattered across refugee camps. The Cathari had lost their homeworld. The Morvathi were broken, their psychic networks shattered by the trauma of what they had experienced. Ambassador Velkarn had survived by luck alone. His ship had been far from the Velar Nebula when the massacre occurred. Now, he sat in the chamber. Watching the footage from the human battle for the 100th time, he watched human ships scatter like frightened birds. He watched them spring traps with savage creativity. He watched them ram their own vessels into the enemy, sacrificing themselves without hesitation. He watched them fight with a fury and determination that made his silver light flicker with something he had never felt before. Shame the Conclave had dismissed. Humanity as ordinary. They had labeled them as laborers and servants. They had laughed at their soft skin and short lives. And while the Conclave's perfect fleets died in 3 hours, ordinary humanity had fought for 12 and emerged victorious. "We made an error," Velkarn said quietly. The other ambassadors looked at him. "We judged humanity by our standards. We measured their worth using our definitions. We thought that because they had no single exceptional trait, they were not exceptional." He gestured at the frozen image on the display. It showed the Defiance, burned and broken, still firing at the retreating swarm. "We were fools." Zyreth of the Navigators nodded slowly. He had returned to the Conclave after the battle, carrying stories of what he had witnessed among the humans. He told them about Sarah Chen, who smiled while preparing for her own death. He told them about the soldiers who trained in darkness and the engineers who practiced for failure. He told them about Admiral Cross, who faced certain destruction with nothing but determination in her eyes. "They possess no single exceptional trait," Zyreth said, "but they possess all traits in moderate measure. They can adapt to any environment. They can bond with any species. They heal from injuries that would kill a Silthri. They form emotional attachments that drive them to impossible courage. They feel fear, but they act anyway. They know they will die, but they fight for the next generation." The ancient Dralith spoke, its stone voice heavy with newfound respect. "They are not ordinary. They are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." But danger was not all that humanity had shown. Even as the battle raged, human ships had diverted to rescue survivors from the Velar Nebula massacre. Human medical teams worked without rest to save Cathari soldiers floating in the void.
Omen.
Engineers shared their technology freely with any species that asked. Human soldiers stood guard over refugee camps, protecting aliens they had never met, asking nothing in return. When the Morvathi ambassador, still traumatized by his encounter with the swarm's mind, wandered the halls of a human station in confusion, it was a human nurse who found him. She could not speak his language. She could not understand his fear. But she sat with him through the night, holding his clawed hand, humming soft songs until he fell asleep. When Cathari refugees arrived on human worlds, they expected hostility. Their species had voted to classify humanity as Tier 7. They had mocked the soft-skinned creatures. Instead, they found welcome. Human families opened their homes to the insectoid aliens. Human children played with Cathari young, finding ways to communicate despite having no common language. Human cooks tried to prepare food that the Cathari could eat, often failing hilariously, but always trying again. This was what confused the galaxy the most. Humanity had proven they could be terrifying in battle. They had shown they could match the cruelty of any species when survival demanded it. But when the fighting ended, they became something else. They became gentle. They became kind. They became helpers. The Conclave struggled to understand this contradiction. How could the same species that rammed ships into their enemies also adopt the orphaned children of those enemies? How could warriors who fought without mercy also weep over the bodies of fallen foes? regardless of species. Xyrath had the answer, though it took him time to find the words. Humans are not warriors by nature, he explained. They are survivors. They fight because they must, not because they want to. When fighting is necessary, they become the most dangerous beings in existence. When fighting is over, they return to their true nature. He paused, searching for the right phrase. They are caretakers, protectors. They defend not just themselves, but anyone who needs defending. The conclave voted to reclassify humanity. The new assessment took days to finalize because there was no category that fit them properly. In the end, they created a new classification entirely: humanity. Tier 1. Leadership species. Combat capability. Adaptive. Infinite. Below the classification was a note that had never appeared in any species file before. Caution.
Ow.
Do not underestimate. Do not provoke. Do not abandon. Admiral Helena Cross received the news while recovering on Earth. The battle had nearly killed her. She had burns on 40% of her body. She had lost vision in one eye. Lungs were scarred from breathing smoke on the damaged bridge. Doctors said she might never walk again. She was planning to walk by next month. Xyrath visited her in the hospital. Through the window, they could see the sun setting over the ocean. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, colors that Xyrath had no words for in his own language. You could rule the galaxy now, he said. The conclave would follow you. They fear you. They respect you. They would obey any order you gave. Helena laughed, then winced because laughing hurt her damaged ribs. We do not want to rule. We never wanted to rule. We just want to live and help others do the same. Why? Xyrath asked. You have the power to take whatever you want. Why not use it? Helena thought about the question for a long time. Outside, the sun touched the horizon, spreading golden light across the water. Because power does not make you important, she finally said. Kindness makes you important. Connection makes you important. The things you build and the people you help and the love you share, those are what matter. She gestured at the sunset. Look at that. Is it not the most beautiful thing you have ever seen? Xyrath looked. He had seen stars born and die. He had witnessed the formation of galaxies. He had traveled to places no other being had ever gone. But this simple sunset on. This simple planet touched something inside him that he had not known existed. Yes, he admitted, it is beautiful. That is why we fight, Helena said. Not for power, not for glory, not for revenge. We fight so that sunsets like this can continue to exist. We fight so that children can play, and lovers can dance, and old people can tell stories. We fight for life in all its ordinary, beautiful forms. The sun disappeared below the horizon. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the swarm was still alive, still hungry, still healing. They would return. They would adapt. And when they did, humanity would be waiting. But that was a problem for another day. Tonight, an old soldier watched the stars come out and felt peace. Word spread across the galaxy. Species that had surrendered to despair began to hope again. Civilizations that had given up started rebuilding. The swarm could be beaten. The darkness could be pushed back. Ordinary beings could do extraordinary things. Refugees on 100 worlds looked up at the sky and whispered a new word, human word that they had learned from the soft.